First, I'd like to talk to you all about the need for water use efficient crops in the lower Rio Grande Valley. Due to the rapidly changing climate and increased extreme weather events such as drought, the region has struggled with water shortages, which have been characterized by low annual rainfall and compounded with legal and regulatory issues surrounding irrigation. As a result, multiple water-demanding crops have been unable to be economically and sustainably produced in the region or even lost altogether. For example, last year Texas lost its only sugar mill after 50 years of production due to water shortage. This essentially ended the commercial production of sugarcane for our region altogether. With the adoption of more water use efficient crops, we can increase our region's agricultural sustainability by improving environmental conservation, economic sustainability, food security, and resource efficiency. And we can further enhance our region's economic stability by lowering water input costs and potentially offering some regulatory compliance and incentives to growers. So one water use efficient crop that serves as a good potential candidate for the RGV is dragon fruit, also known as pitaya or pitaya. These colloquial terms are region dependent and are often used interchangeably to describe several species and genre of perennial night-blooming cacti. For example, in the Eastern Hemisphere, the term dragon fruit is commonly used to describe species within the Selanisterius genus, whereas in the Western Hemisphere, pitaya, pitahaya, and yellow pitahaya are commonly used traditionally to describe regionally produced fruit from the genre Acanthoserius, Echinocereus, Escotria, as well as Stenocereus. And as you can see, these cacti do produce fruit, however, their fruit do not possess the same commercial qualities as those fruit within the Selanisterius genus that we know as dragon fruit. So the Selanisterius genus actually consists of around 31 species of vining epiphytic night-blooming cacti, all of which share a non-climacteric ripening pattern. This essentially means after harvesting, the fruit is unable to ripen. This makes it crucial for the fruit to be harvested at their peak ripeness just to ensure good fruit taste and quality. Now, species origin does vary, but they're generally recognized as being native to subtropical and tropical Mexico, as well as South and Central America. However, production has spread across the globe, primarily in Asia, where most dragon fruit production occurs today. Now, on a large scale, there are 4 primary species used for global commercial production. This includes Selanisterius fundatus, S. monocanthus, S. costarricensis, and S. megalanthus. So when looking at the economic and production importance of Selanisterius species, it is pretty evident on a global scale. For example, the dragon fruit global market was valued at around $14 billion in 2024, with projections to rise to about $20 billion by 2032. Among the largest producers of the globe is Vietnam, where they have an average production yield of around 22 to 35 metric tons per hectare per year. And among the largest importers includes China and the US. If we look at the US in 2023, we had an import volume of around 259.9 million kilograms. This was valued at approximately $350 million. This just highlights the gap in domestic dragon fruit production for the United States. And although limited, there are a few major producing states as of right now. This includes Florida, California, and Hawaii, but there is growing interest in Texas as a potential production region. So when it comes to dragon fruit cultivation, they're going to tend to thrive in dry tropical climates with temperatures around 20 to 29 Celsius. They also prefer a well-draining soil with a pH around 6 to 7 and an irrigation or rainfall value of around 1,100 to 2,500 millimeters a year, which is relatively low. Now, when initially establishing your plants, you can go about it with one of 2 ways. You can either start via stem propagation, or you can grow directly from seed. Both of these have their pros and cons, however, most growers are going to tend to start from stem cutting just because it reduces the amount of time that it takes for the plant to reach vegetative maturity and produce yield. And because this plant is a climbing cacti, most productions do rely on some sort of support structures. This can range anywhere from trellising to fencing, walls, and even trees. Another important aspect of dragon fruit cultivation is its varied pollination requirements, which varies between varieties. Some varieties display self-compatibility, where they're able to utilize their own pollen for fertilization, while others are self-incompatible and rely on cross-pollination from a compatible variety for their fruit. Now, the growth and harvesting timeframes are also region dependent, but in Texas, our growing season is going to range from May to September, and we're going to be looking at around 4 to 6 flowering flush per year. The floral bud to bloom is generally going to take 20 to 35 days, regardless of species. However, the fruit ripening period can vary pretty drastically. As most species will take around 30 to 50 days post-bloom to fully ripen. Some species, such as the yellow-peeled Selenocerius megalanthus, may take anywhere from 150 to 180 days post-bloom to fully ripen. So with that being said, my hypothesis is that dragon fruit shows promise as a drought-tolerant crop that can thrive under the environmental conditions of South Texas, presenting itself as a potential alternative crop and sustainable crop for the region. So my study had two objectives. The first was to assess the growth rate and adaptability of dragon fruit in South Texas, and the second was to determine its water use efficiency. This was essentially done by performing a randomized and replicated field trial located in San Benito, Texas, which we established on February 27th of 2024. Now, the way that we did this is we used 3 different dragon fruit cultivars, all of which represent a different peel and pulp color, which you can see here. We then subjected them to 3 varying irrigation treatments of half, 1, and 2 gallons per hour for 1 hour twice weekly. Now, in regard to our experimental layout, it consisted of 1 row with a total of 90 T-posts. Each were situated around 5 feet apart. And there were 30 posts per irrigation treatment, and within those treatments, 10 posts were allocated per variety. Now, because each post supported 2 plants, there were a total of 180 plants utilized within our field trial. Here you can see a visual representation of our field trial. The green dots represent individual plants. The Vietnamese giant, the purple, is the purple haze variety, and the axe is the orange. Now, data and measurements began, our first data collection began on April 30th, 2024. We collected data by hand every 4 weeks for a period of 9 months. We essentially determined vegetative growth by documenting the number of primary cladodes, which you can see here, before branching, as well as the secondary branches and tertiary branches. We also measured the length of the primary cladode before branching, as well as the total maximum plant length, which essentially was the length starting from the base of the stem popule to the tip of the largest branch, or longest branch. We essentially determined the water use efficiency by reporting the water flow meter values throughout the course of 11 months. Now, this picture to the right is a photo of an already established dragon fruit plant of the axe variety from our field trial. So here I have 2 graphs displaying the growth results for purple haze. As you can see, overall purple haze displayed relatively good growth throughout the trial, although it did have a slightly higher preference for the lower irrigation regimens, as it did best in the half a gallon and 1 gallon per hour treatments. Now, the graph to our right displays the final average clado count per irrigation regimen, and here we can see that there's a correlation between lower irrigation volumes and higher numbers of cladodes produced. However, when we look at our other variety, Vietnamese giant, we can kind of see an opposite trend where it had a slightly higher preference for the higher irrigation volumes, performing better in the 1 gallon and 2 gallon per hour treatments. And when looking at the bar graph here, we can also see kind of an opposite trend to that of purple haze, where it had higher numbers of cladode production within the higher irrigation regimens. Overall, Vietnamese performed the poorest of all the varieties. And our final variety, axe, although we can see that there's little variation between the treatments, it did display a slight preference for the lower irrigation, similar to that of purple haze. Overall, its growth was also similar to that of Purple Haze, as it did much better than Vietnamese Giant. When looking at the bar graph, we can also see that there was a similar correlation between lower irrigation volumes and higher numbers of clados produced for this variety. So the way that we determined the water use efficiency was essentially by comparing our dragon fruit trial water usage over 11 months to that of the estimated yearly water usage of citrus in Texas. Now, our preliminary findings suggested that even under the highest irrigation regimen of 2 gallons per hour, our dragon fruit trial only utilized 25,000 gallons per hectare over the period of 11 months. This is significantly lower than that of the estimated yearly water usage of citrus in Texas, which ranges from 2,300,000 to 3,200,000 gallons per hectare per year. So just to make some final comparisons, I created a graph on the left which displays the best performing treatments per variety. And here we can see that overall the best performing varietal treatment was pH under the half gallon per hour treatment. However, this was closely followed by ACTS, not only in the 1 gallon per hour treatment, but the 2 gallon per hour treatment as well. And despite this being the best performing treatment group for Vietnamese Giant, it still performed relatively less vigorously than the other varieties. Now, the graph to our right displays the varietal responses to the lowest irrigation regimen of half a gallon per hour. And although we can see that Purple Haze and ACTS both display relatively high growth values despite limited water availability, Vietnamese Giant again did not, suggesting that it may have a slightly higher irrigation preference when it comes to optimizing growth. Now, despite the data suggesting that there are varietal differences when it comes to irrigation preference and the optimization of their growth, dragon fruit still displayed its adaptability to the South Texas climate, as well as its ability to be cultivated under relatively low water input. Further research will study the fruit and yield quality, as well as the economic feasibility of integrating dragon fruit into our agricultural systems. I would just like to thank the Texas A&M Kingsville Citrus Center Pathology Lab, as well as my advisors and friends. I would also like to thank the NSF, the Texas Water Development Board, as well as our grower and collaborator, John Steve. Thank you.